This is potentially the site that Jesus was historically raised from the dead and given a new material, physical body, actually a resurrection body. The four writers of Jesus' life organised their material around this defining moment, that Jesus Christ was physically crucified, died, was buried in a rich man's tomb, and physically raised from the dead. They all claim, and in fact Jesus himself claims, that he is the Messiah. He gives himself that title over 80 times, the Son of Man. This was a direct reference to a prophecy given through Daniel that a Son of Man would come. He would be given all authority, power, dominion, splendour. All the nations of the earth would bow before him. All four writers speak of Jesus walking into Jerusalem on a colt, on an unridden donkey, which directly fulfills a prophecy by Zechariah that their king will come riding on a donkey, establishing peace and righteousness throughout the earth. When friends and others said he was the Messiah, Jesus agreed with them. Peter, one of his closest friends, says, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God," to which Jesus replies, "You did not receive this from human thinking, for your own ideas. You received this as revelation from my Father in heaven." Jesus, again and again, was saying he is the Messiah. There were also many ways Jesus fulfilled prophecy that would have been beyond his control. He was born into the tribe of Judah, particularly the house of David, and even born into the birthplace, the hometown of David, Bethlehem, which means house of bread. He fled from Bethlehem to Egypt as a toddler. Then he grew up in Nazareth, a Nazarene, and Galilee of the Gentiles was honoured. All prophecies regarding the Messiah. When we come to the end of his life, he is betrayed by a friend for 30 pieces of silver. His hands and his feet are pierced through the crucifixion, and foreigners at his feet cast lots for his one seamless undergarment, which was fulfilled by the Roman soldiers who cast lots for his clothing at his crucifixion. And finally, he was buried in a rich man's tomb. After he was physically raised from the dead, he also appeared firstly to Mary and the other women who came to the tomb very early on that morning, the morning after the Sabbath rest. Then Peter and John and other disciples, and even to a group of about 500, in the words of Luke, giving many convincing proofs that he was alive. After 40 days, he ascended into heaven, instructing his followers to wait in Jerusalem for power from on high, that they may be witnesses to the ends of the earth of the good news of his resurrection from the dead. Jesus, clearly, according to the writers of his life and himself, was and is the Messiah. It didn't seem like he was coming as a political leader to overthrow the oppressive regime of Rome. So what was this Messiah? Who was he? Who was he bringing a deliverance to? Well, he says a very interesting point in John. He says, "He who sins is a slave to sin, but when the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed." And at the night that he was betrayed, he was actually celebrating a Passover feast. And in the midst of that Passover feast, he takes, they would have been eating bread and drinking wine as per their custom, and he takes a cup of wine and says, "This is my blood." And he takes bread and says, "This is my body. My blood will be poured out, my body will be broken. I'm inaugurating a new covenant with you, a new way to relate to God, a fresh way to recover intimacy, and it will be through the shedding of my blood." Now, the Passover was deeply symbolic and powerful for the Jewish community. For about 1,500 years, they would have been celebrating it regularly when they were in good covenant connection with God, and they were certainly celebrating it from across the diaspora on this Passover. They were celebrating a specific moment in their history, the moment that Moses led the people of Israel out of the oppressive regime under Egypt into a glorious and full deliverance through the Red Sea, birthed as a new free nation. So in the middle of this feast, Jesus is addressing this issue of being delivered from some sort of oppressive regime. But when he uses that phrase, slaves to sin, he's actually realigning who the oppressor is and recovering what was revealed right back in Genesis. There are deeply oppressive political regimes, but the most oppressive regime of all is the governing principle of sin, under which both oppressor and oppressed are tyrannized. And it is this core root issue, this governing principle, that this Messiah was seeking to overthrow and deal with. Political oppression is the bad and corrupt and unjust fruit of the bad and unjust and corrupt fruit of the sin nature. And it was that nature that needed to be addressed. In his death, it died with him, and in his resurrection, he showed a full and complete victory and triumph over it. So this Messiah, Jesus, came, and he came as the Messiah that the law and the prophets, the Tanakh, were pointing to. He himself shows in this wonderful walk to Emmaus after his resurrection to disciples how he fulfills all these prophecies about the Messiah. But he wasn't bringing a deliverance from the oppressive regime of Rome. Both Egypt and Rome needed their own fundamental deliverance too. He was bringing the core fundamental deliverance from the oppressive regime of sin. And having done that in his death and resurrection, humanity could enter back into the good governance of God and recover that intimacy that they so tragically lost at Eden.